Sure can.
Great, thank you. All right, we have a few people on. I imagine we're going to be having more people join us here pretty soon. And thanks for coming. This is the second peer-to-peer forum that GBC's put on. This one focusing on the role of clergy in green burial, and hopefully we get to talk about the impact that spiritual communities can be having in moving the movement forward. There's a lot of other interesting aspects. And the reason that, one of the main reasons I wanted to do with this was because when I first got into the work for the GBC, Father Charles Morris asked me to please read the Pope's encyclical on nature that had just come out. And I'm not Catholic and I resisted. But I did go and read it. And I ended up writing a pretty big, to me, very interesting, did a lot of very interesting research and wrote a paper about it. I was quite fascinated with the perspective, and that opened my eyes to the fact that we have a lot of different ways of coming at this work through the lens of spiritual community and so on. So I'm hoping for a rich conversation today. My name is Lee Webster. I also want to introduce Kim Adams, who's helping me on the phones for us here. She helps keep the noise down and make sure that everybody gets heard, and she archives this, captures what we have in chat. If you're new to Zoom, you can go to the More button or to the chat button, and you'll see that pops open. It gives you a place to write questions, answers, make notes that you want people to see, and it's a great tool for us so that we can make sure that we catch everybody's thoughts around this, and we can return to them later. We also record this, and it'll be available on the forum page. So basically, we have 4 rules, kind of 4 guiding principles. The first is that we are respectful, and we are as brief as we can be. I promise I'm the longest talker I'm going to be for the whole thing right now. We want to stay muted unless we're speaking because it keeps the noise down. And again, using the chat. So that's pretty much it. 2 more things that I do have to say, because we are the GBC and we're a 501c3 educational nonprofit, so we do accept donations. I always want to let you know that we're happy to do that. They help support the forums and other initiatives that promote green burial accessibility and understanding. And the second is to also invite you at the end of this call to join the Green Burial Council Peer Forum on Facebook, where you'll be able to continue to have conversations with people that you meet here, and others who have shown up at forums. Gives you a chance to have a one-on-one with people and meet more. So that's it. That's the end of my diatribe, and I just want to open it up. Basically, there are a couple different ways of talking about this. One is about the very practical aspect of having religious exemptions when you're starting a green burial cemetery. And we can talk about that. That's pretty practical. I also, I really want to hear more, though, from a lot of the people on the call who are clergy members who might be willing to describe how they approach this topic in their own community, and what that means to them, how it changes the way that people perceive the whole topic of death, how it changes, has a potential for changing the way that congregants interact with each other around this topic, or anything else you want to talk about. So I'm going to be quiet now and see who would like to start the conversation. Go ahead, Miss Sarah, unmute yourself.
You're on.
Okay. So when you mentioned the Pope's encyclical on nature, and suddenly what popped into my mind is this wonderful book that was recommended to me several years ago by her first name's not coming to me, Colcutt in South Carolina. It's called Becky, A Christian End, or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Totally written, I think they're Greek Orthodox church in South Carolina. and it really was a fantastic book. And before I forgot it, I just wanted, if people hadn't heard of it or hadn't read it, I just wanted to mention it. Okay, there you go. That's the way to market it.
Probably shows it backwards, right?
A Christian Ending.
Yes, by Mark and Elizabeth Barna.
Yeah. Such a great book.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I've got a couple of people on the call who are going to be on our panel at the conference in Minnesota in October. I'm going to start then and just introduce them. Maybe you guys have got something to sort of get people started. First is the Reverend Cody Sanders, and you're going to have to give your own title, Cody. You've got a long one for me. Why don't you get started, and then we'll see if we can get other people to introduce themselves and where they're coming from.
Okay, sure. So I am in Boston, Massachusetts. I serve as the pastor of Old Cambridge Baptist Church in Cambridge, and I'm the American Baptist chaplain at Harvard, and do some teaching in pastoral care and counseling at various places, mostly right now at Chicago Theological Seminary. And a lot of my teaching and research these days is around practices of care for our bodies when they die. And part of that is involving green burial and trying to help educate congregations and faith communities on the pastoral and the environmental and the economic aspects of our conventional burial practices, and moving toward practices that are more engaged with the body and also more environmentally ethical. I'm working right now with 3 other researchers, one of whom is on the phone, Rochelle Martin, and a New Testament scholar in Texas named Michael Parsons, and an English professor in North Carolina named June Hobbs, who works on memorialization practices. And we are doing this 3-year collaborative inquiry grant funded by the Louisville Institute, looking at some of these questions together.
What's the end result of that?
Several different results. So the 4 of us are presenting a panel on our research this coming summer, to the National Association of Baptist Professors in Religion. Mike Parsons and I are co-authoring a book together that we hope will resource congregations to have these conversations in a really theologically robust manner. Rochelle can talk about some of the stuff that she's involved in the Toronto area that's particularly geared toward community education. And June Hobbs is also writing a book, and her book is more on memorialization practices.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of outcomes, but it's been really exciting. We're in our going into our 3rd year of the 3-year research cycle, so it's been a lot of fun so far.
It's been fun watching you. I was very excited, and hello, Rochelle. Good to have you on the call. Rochelle's been in the home funeral movement for a very long time, and when I saw a couple of years ago when you all got together to do your tour of green burial cemeteries, it was great fun to see that you had connected to each other. Mm-hmm. So Rochelle, would you like to hop on the call and talk about what your work entails?
Hi, Lee. Thanks for that intro, Cody. That was, it's always exciting to hear about our project. We get together kind of once a year to do some trips and exploration and research. And so it's nice to hear your voice, Cody. So yeah, just here in Hamilton, Ontario, I do a lot of, I guess, green burial advocacy and death care education. I do mostly groups. I've done some pastoral care, spiritual care, professional development for hospitals in the area, also church groups and we have a local group of Native Canadians called Six Nations, and have had the opportunity to do some learning and educating with them in the last few years, which has been really exciting. So yeah, like my background is Roman Catholic, but my earlier background, I grew up Mennonite. So I'm so intrigued with the way Protestant churches and at a larger level, at least with like, for example, the Pope's encyclical, the Roman Catholic Church has started to really consider at least the possibility that we need to pay attention to what we believe and then do with our beloved dead. And I think that other religions have held on to these traditions a lot better. Jews, Muslims, some Native Canadian and Native American groups have held on to the sort of integrity of matching our after-death care and burial practices with what we believe and what we practice. And I think that Christians have really got off the rails in North America with the rest of the culture, just kind of along with the rest of the culture over the last little while. So I'm very excited to have like this particular gathering of pastors as an indication that the Christian church and perhaps larger, to speak more broadly, like other organized religious groups are really starting to think about what we believe and what we need to do for the sake of our environment, to be conscientious in the use of our resources, and to build community in a way that I think we've really lost out on in some of our Christian faith traditions, not being engaged with death care and burial. And I think too, not to put too fine a point on it, but for those of us who are really involved in the after-death care scene, there are so many new and environmentally friendly options kind of coming on the marketplace. I'm thinking about like human composting or hydrolysis, alkaline hydrolysis. So these are things that I think are going to be interesting discussion points, particularly for faith communities to have, and really balancing conscientiousness about our commitment to doing the best we can for the natural world, and also sort of avoiding cultural fads. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion to kind of wade our way through that, and or even the differences among green burial, whether or not conservation burial, for example, is something that we need to put a more organized effort into as church groups or religious groups. So all of these things I'm really interested in talking more about and learning more about, and it's been great to be a part of this project and to continue to learn and teach about it. Thanks.
Thanks, Rochelle. I think you just pointed us in a really good direction. I'm wondering if anybody wants to speak to ways that you may have gotten the conversation started in your own congregation, what that might look like, and you know what that has sounded like. Does anybody have experience around that? Yeah, Bill, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Bill Gupton. I'm the senior minister at Heritage Universalist Unitarian Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. And over the course of the last maybe decade, our congregation has become very involved in lots of different death work. I took a sabbatical in 2008 that led me to go around the country and check out various green burial sites. I was getting very interested in green burial, and came back, and in the course of the last several years, our congregation has created a green burial ground. I did a sermon about green burial. Yeah, a lot of people were very enthused, excited about the idea. I'm sure many of you sort of have the experience of when someone first hears about green burial, it's kind of like a light bulb goes off, and they're like, wow, I never knew, and they get super excited because it's just so, it makes so much sense, and it resonates with people. So there are a lot of folks who resonated with this sermon. I had been hoping that someone in the Cincinnati area would start a green burial sanctuary. No one was doing it. So over the course of a year or two, we kept talking about it, and I was doing more research. I think this is something we wanted to chat about some tonight too. I discovered that at least in my state, Ohio, that a cemetery that was a religious cemetery, whatever that was, and it was not very, it was left ambiguous what that actually meant, but a cemetery in this case that would be owned by a church has a lot of exemptions from various regulations, and from the requirement about a perpetual care fund even. So the church voted to, or the church board voted to establish an LLC, a separate LLC called Heritage Acres Memorial Sanctuary, and we began the process of looking for land and raising money. And only a few months ago, we finally purchased our land. I was actually just out there tromping around for 3 hours this afternoon. I went out for 15 minutes and stayed there 3 hours, which happens just a lot. It's a beautiful place. There's lots of good woods to hike through, open farmland as well. And so our congregation, it's not a church cemetery other than legally in the state of Ohio, it's a church cemetery. It's non-denominational. It's going to be open to everyone. It's going to be in keeping with our universalist inclusion principles. And so we will begin burying people this spring. And our church does other things too. I've been facilitating Death Cafe here in Cincinnati, so that a lot of that comes out of our church. We have an end-of-life ministry team. We had a woman who we had our first home funeral in February, almost a year ago now, for a woman in the congregation. They're trained death midwives, death care doulas in the congregation, and so we do a lot of death work.
Nice. It sounds as though it's really changed the composition of your community as well, and the way that they deal with each other.
The culture of the church has really changed over the last several years, becoming death aware, becoming death comfortable, becoming death positive. It is a subject that often comes up, but it's just part of life. It's something that we celebrate as part of the cycle of life. And I think a large number of people have had their lives changed by being part of this congregation. One person puts it this way. They say, this place has changed my life and it's changed my death.
Wow.
And to be a church community that has that kind of effect on people is very fulfilling.
Yeah, I'm interested in who else on the call has had some sort of a similar or is hoping to have a similar kind of conversation. Do we have other clergy members who want to speak to that?
I'm an interminister for elders and non-denominational, and I belong to a UU church, and I've been trying to. We own a cemetery. It's ancient, burial ground, ancient, old years old burial, and I brought it up with my minister. That's a great idea, but we've been in negotiations with it for them to take it over because it's too much work, maintain it, keep it up. We do have a very active environmental justice team, and they're also interested. I lead death cafes there, 5 Wishes workshops and stuff. I struggle with what people say, well, I love this green burial idea. How do we find out more about it, and where can we do it? Because they want it now. They don't necessarily want to invest the time in creating the space. They're very good in promoting what already exists. And I said, I don't have anything I'm in the Merrimack Valley in Massachusetts. So I get little nibbles and I get people saying they're interested, but I'm not quite sure how to get more of a groundswell of people involved to have the kind of commitment that Bill was talking about. And I'm curious to know how you do that. I mean, we've got about 350 people in our congregation. I want to say about 80 of them have been to the Death Cafe. So I know there's a certain amount of interest in there, but it's a very passive kind of interest.
Right.
We want to let people know, Denise, what is your last name? Van Meter.
Van Foren.
Van Foren. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Lee, can I jump in?
Please.
This is Heidi. And Denise, are you familiar with the Green Burial Mass, folks?
No.
Was that a yes? Sorry.
Oh, the Green Burial of Massachusetts group?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
I actually.
go ahead.
No. I went to a death salon and met some folks there, and yeah.
Yeah, they've been working very hard on this concept, and I think they're making really great progress. We're hopeful that in the next year or so, you might hear some even better news about some of their efforts and their advocacy. So I would keep posted to their website and show up at some of their events, because I think they're doing a lot of really good work.
Yes, thank you, Heidi. Yeah, thank you.
Heidi, you want to describe what's going on with you?
Sure. Yeah, if I can speak a little bit, I'm not clergy. I'm a Quaker. So for those of you who are clergy, you're probably familiar with Quakers. And I think we all in the Quaker faith subscribe to this belief that there's God in all of us. And our relationship with God is a very personal one and defined really individually, but shared within a community of folks. And I've been practicing Quaker all my life, was raised sort of internationally by diplomatic parents, and so didn't have any sort of rootedness until I landed at a Quaker boarding school in Swaziland. And that was the origin, I really feel, of my sort of central beliefs about how I present in the world. And as many of you or some of you may know, part of Quaker testimonies are simply to live simply and to be sensitive to stewardship of our earth and our natural world. So that was a great space to grow up in, to raise a family in, to walk in. And as I was moving into my own life, I live in Durham, North Carolina, where we have a very rich community of Quakers, and was very participant in establishing programs through the Quaker meeting with our youth group, with caregiving, with folks who were becoming more and more involved in the caregiving of elder parents, and more recently became a part of what we decided to call ourselves. A number of us were particularly interested in this pursuit of end-of-life concerns. And this was all before meeting the wonderful Ann Weston and Sarah Williams, who introduced me to the concept of death cafes. And what I find sort of surprising is we were in the midst of these individual Quakers creating a form of death cafe within our meeting, where we met to discuss anything related to death that was on people's minds. And so that was a very rich experience. It sort of coincided at the same time that I became my mother's primary caregiver, and in a period of 7 months, actually from diagnosis to her death, walked her towards that path, which was very difficult and at all what I was expecting my mother to do, and certainly not what I wanted my mother to do, in terms of sort of recognizing that she was coming to an end, and that there was so much rich space in that walk that we could have sat with and talked about. But I learned so much in that experience, and I treasure my mother for that incredible opportunity of taking care of her. And after she died, I was really at a loss. I loved my job. I was involved in conservation work, land conservation work in the Southeast. So happened to work with a lot of different land conservation groups all over 12 states in the Southeast. I was crazy passionate about my job. But I felt that my experience with my mother was such a turning point in my life that I couldn't do that work anymore under the circumstances I was in, and I needed to take a break and actually really sit with grief, and had the privilege of actually taking a space in my life and making room for that walk of grief, which is really, for those of you who've done that, really transformational, I think. And in the midst of that, leaned on a very good friend for a lot of that experience. And he happened to also be escorting his father towards his death with a terminal diagnosis. And the two of us sort of fumbled along, trying to understand what this massive experience in our lives was really all about. And ultimately, we had both been working in the same field. We just kind of looked up one day and said, oh, this is what we need to do. We need to do this work. And so our conservation consulting work that we've been doing for the last 5 years has become more and more directed towards conservation burial grounds. And we now consult with folks around the country who want to build these projects, which I will underline and underscore and put in bold, are really significant projects. And they require a tremendous amount of commitment and time and resources. And we are just passionate about trying to help folks find the right mix of their own sort of drive and desires mixed in with what the community needs, what the community is asking for, what possible resources they may have, the relationships that they need to build with the land conservation groups that they might be working with, because of course that's a very important part of conservation burial. And then one last little piece is, in the midst of that work, we helped found the Conservation Burial Alliance, which is a group of folks working around the country on existing conservation burial grounds to help uphold the standards for conservation and support one another in this very beautiful and very specific work. So sorry, that was a very long monologue, but that's my story in 5 minutes or a little bit more.
Thanks, Heidi. I think it's really important for people to see the connection between your spiritual upbringing and how it kind of led you right into this place. And I think I've been looking at things sort of backwards, you know, that people are discovering green burial and then they're suddenly realizing how important it is to explore. It's kind of nice to see that it's working both ways. And one of my big questions for all of you who are clergy is how you're introducing it to your community and to your congregation. You know, is there a way that you're doing it that I don't know. I mean, some of you have said occasionally I'm asked to speak from the pulpit in different congregations, which I really enjoy, but I'm just a lay person doing it. I'm wondering what that feels like as an ordained minister, and what that, you know, how you go about that. How do you raise consciousness in your congregation around this? Yeah, don't forget to unmute yourself.
I'd love to see Bill Gupton's sermon.
Serving?
Your sermon.
Sermon. Preacher.
Sermon.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You said you did a sermon on green burial.
Right.
I think it'd be fantastic to be able to read it.
I will send that out. How should I do that? How about I send that to Lee?
Sure, I'll find a way to put it up
Right. Okay.
and distribute it. Are there other ways other than from the pulpit to get this conversation going in spiritual communities?
People are always dealing with someone in their life is facing death. That's a very common experience. And working with people who are facing death is an opportunity to offer options to people, options that people might not know they have. At this point, folks come to me because they know that I'm someone with some expertise in certain areas. But even before that, I'm thinking about a person who came, who was dealing with a funeral home, and they were having a sibling had died suddenly, and they were having what far too many people have, which is the very challenging and unsatisfying experience with a funeral home. And there's an opportunity at that point to offer guidance to people about there are people who will listen to you and serve your needs, and there are other options.
Do you feel it's it's part of the responsibility of being a church leader to offer this information, all of it?
Oh, absolutely, and even if to things like pre-planning, there many people have not done their pre-planning, and there's offering workshops in the church around pre-planning for the congregants and for the community, the wider community, or in the local senior center like I've recently done. People are aware that this is something that they should be doing, but there's a hesitancy to do it. So making it available, making it fun, bringing some community spirit to the process, it helps open conversations as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, it's been helpful to connect this conversation with other commitments that my congregation has already held for some time. I mean, my congregation is very committed to ecological justice concerns, and most folks can tell you everything about the fracked gas compressor station that's being built nearby, and all of the things that are wrong with that. But no one had really connected our death care practices to their environmental justice commitments.
Right.
So just helping bridge that gap for them just opened up a whole realm of inquiry for people that they didn't know even existed. And so, and it's a very academic congregation. So of course we invited someone to come and speak about green burial and home funerals. I gave them things to read about it, and it's just sort of growing from there. I'm going in a couple of weeks to have a conversation with about a dozen congregants who live in a co-housing community, and together they want to have this conversation about green burial. And so it's been helpful to, I think, take an approach that relates this conversation to something that the congregation already cares about. It may be pastoral care at the time of death, or it may be a liturgical kind of commitment to funerary practices, but being able to relate it in that way was helpful to open it up for my congregation as a possibility.
That's fascinating to me. I think that's kind of what I'm looking for here with this conversation too, is what are the various entry points for the green burial conversation, coming in at kind of a little more oblique angle rather than just trying to hit people upside the head with it. Because for many people it is a shocking conversation. But I think you're right. And certainly from the UU perspective, coming from social justice, which is a pretty big piece of my pie around this, creating access for everyone, not just the wealthy, not just people who are connected and have access. And that's a lot of my advocacy work around home funerals, is having access that goes beyond hiring a professional. So I think that churches have all these various committees, right? Aren't they all? I mean, I don't know, but it seems to me like a lot of them live on committee work. A lot of those committees might be ways to enter this conversation. So I like that idea. Social justice and what you were talking about. Are there other ways that we can be encouraging clergy members and church community members to bring this in? What ideas do you have around that?
Lee, I'll just jump in if I may. Again, this is Heidi speaking from the perspective of our Quaker meeting. We have a number of elders who don't have children, have moved away from other family members, and are really in a very responsible and active way looking at their final chapters. And what does that mean? Some of them have means, and so there are some very well-regarded continuing care facilities in the Durham Chapel Hill area that people are signed up for, but others don't have means like that, and I think are already inquiring as to what role the meeting itself can play for folks who don't have family. I mean, this is their chosen family, and we're a meeting that has grown significantly in the last 20 years. It feels like it grows a little bit more every year. We have a lot of young families and a very robust children's program. And more, I feel we're starting to really turn our heads towards an actual request, which is that for the older members of the meeting, they're asking what role can the meeting play for us? And they're, in Quaker fashion, forming small communities of, I mean, we don't call ourselves an actual committee necessarily, but a circle of concern, and wrestling with those questions within that small circle. And then generally we'll bring those ideas back to what we refer to as meeting for business, where those decisions are discerned amongst the larger community, and then actions are made. But I think one of the points I feel in my experience is simply meeting people where they are. And so in our faith community, being good listeners and trying to find the right connections with people in the community who are ready to support folks in that situation.
Thanks, Heidi. I'd like to bring Matt. Matt just wrote to us. We have two Matts on the phone, I think. Matt, the Catholic priest. Could you speak to us and tell us what's going on?
The other Matt might be me as well, because I joined on my phone, but now I figured out how to work the chat.
Wonderful.
So you folks have been so far asking some questions that, well, my community hasn't come to yet. I've been looking at this more from the perspective of a pastor who just hears non-congregants in my area have an interest in green burial. And I'm not quite sure how to make that possible for them. We're one of the only cemeteries in this neck of the woods. And so I have the ability managing that cemetery to probably make that possible. I just don't know how to do it or what green burial entirely means. I just want to be able to serve better people at the end of their lives in this area.
Well, I think we can hook you up with some other priests who've actually got these cemeteries up and running. One of the things that I learned when I was doing the research for the paper that I wrote about this, because I was so fascinated with the way that the Catholic Church has taken this on and the reasons for why they have. The Catholic Church is really leading the way in several states. They're developing more and more green burial space adjacent to their conventional space, and so I think you're going to find that there's a great deal of support and information out there in various groups and dioceses. So I can help connect you up, and I imagine there are other people on the call who can as well. But I'll make a note of
That
that.
would be good.
Sure.
That'd be great.
Any other thoughts about entry points and how we can address this differently? Anybody have anything else they want to just pop in there? I'm eager to hear from Bonnie and Jeremy and Dana and Bug. We haven't heard from you yet either. Perhaps one of you,
Jeremy.
there you are, Jeremy.
And I'm calling in from St. Petersburg, Florida. And I don't have a lot of experience in this realm because I'm a seminary student. So I'm actually one of Cody's students, and that's how I knew about this. And the whole topic of green burial was relatively new to me when I took one of his classes. It was called Death, Dying, and the Dead. I think that's what it was called, right? And that's where it really opened up for me, because I realized that not only my family structure, but my faith foundation had a very hands-off kind of detached relationship with death. And I think that seems to be pretty common, where it was more of a fear-based relationship, where it was something that you'd even hear people say is, if I die. It was like this pushing it so far away that it's almost like we were all blindsided when it actually happened. Like we were stunned that somebody died. And going through seminary and going through these classes has really helped me personally to be able to then soon enter into ministry to kind of reconcile that relationship, because I can come at this and heal my own wounds and get a really healthy and honest relationship with death. It's not fearful, but it's just another part of the process of how we ebb and flow and move through this, whatever this is. And so that's why I'm really interested in this. And there's also kind of a now, unfortunately, a very personal aspect to this, that my mom, her health is failing, which is why I've recently relocated to Florida. And so I am walking this journey, towards the end of my mom's life with her. And this has helped me tremendously to have these conversations, like I think maybe Heidi said, meeting someone where they are, because my mom is still in that space of, death is terrifying. Death it's scary. She will be alone. It's dark. It's unknown. It's all these things. And we've had some amazing conversations, and the entry point hasn't been, let's talk about your death. It has been, hey, I took this great class, or I read this book, or I heard this, and I didn't know about this. Did you? And then say, I'm struggling with this, but what do you think? And we have opened up amazing conversations that I think has alleviated some of her concern, definitely has alleviated some of mine. And the fact that there are so many options now, it's almost like green burial is giving power back to the person to say, I get to be a part of this process. I get to also say what happens to me, and it matters to what the causes I believe in, and if I believe in, leaving the earth a better place than when I came here, and I can actually make that happen through my own death in my own body. And it's been remarkable. So the reason I'm on this is just because, obviously, Professor Sanders put it out there for us to see if we might be interested. But for me, this has been a godsend. to be honest.
That's really, and that moves me a lot, Jeremy. I really appreciate you saying that. And you probably already know that you're in Florida. You're in you're right in conservation burial country. You have a lot of options there.
To be honest, that's on my list of I need to figure out where I live now and what's happening.
Okay, I'll send you a list. So you'll and I think that's the best part. Of the best part of this work for me is that it puts me in touch with people who do this work, and so there's very little small talk. You get right to it with people who really understand what's at stake here. So I think you're going to really enjoy meeting the people that you'll meet as you're exploring this in Florida.
Thank you.
I will. I'll send you some good stuff. Thank you. By the way, I love what you said too. I always like to quote Josh Slocum, who's the executive director of the Funeral Consumers Alliance. One of his standard jokes is calling what you were talking about death in the subjunctive mood. You know, it's pretty great. Let's hear from somebody else who hasn't had a chance to speak yet. Dana, can you come on the phone? There you are. We can hear that you're there.
Hello?
Yes, hi.
There you are. I've been
Yeah.
having trouble. I didn't get on until halfway through, so I'm a little lot back behind the curveball here as far as knowing what's been spoken.
We're happy to hear whatever you want to contribute right now anyway.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
Well, I'm pretty new on the scene here, and that what my focus is just trying to get information about where the religious element is in all of this, and it's definitely a spiritual one for me, but the religious one might in some capacity be more a tool to be able to create the green cemetery, which is basically bypassing a lot of hoops and bureaucratic nonsense as far as I can tell, considering, you know, are we talking about conservation burial is the most part?
We're talking about all kinds of burial, but you're bringing up a really important point that I was hoping we would be able to explore. We haven't fully yet. Bill Gupton mentioned it as part of putting together Heritage Acres, but I think that's something we should talk about so that people know what religious exemptions are and what they entail. Are you exploring that right now, Dana?
Yeah.
And what
Yeah,
have you learned?
Well, more so, I'm working on just reading all of the ordinances and statutes for the county and the state, and trying to figure out and talking with the zoning district and the funeral cemetery board of the state, and it's really pretty confusing. It's I think it's such a new thing for people, a new quote new thing, because people haven't made cemeteries for quite a while around here anyway, and so nobody knows.
Where are you? Where are you located?
Midwest Indiana. It's close to
yeah.
Lafayette, Purdue University. So, you know, we're in the bowels of the beast, so to speak, of you know, people that don't venture
Right.
too far out the box.
Indiana.
Yeah. Bill is shaking his head.
Yeah.
Dana and I have actually been in contact here. We've had a long email thread, I think, going for a while. And yeah, there's an awful lot going into this. Trying to find the right resources, I think, is a big part of it. But let's hone in on your point. I wonder, Bill, if you could just speak very succinctly about what the religious exemption is, and in creating new cemetery space, what do you do to go about exercising that?
Well, I'm going to assume that it's different in different states, but in Ohio, in the Ohio Revised Code, there is language about in the cemetery and burial section, there's language and sections that are about so-called church cemeteries. And that is a actual class of cemetery in Ohio. And church cemeteries are exempt from many of the regulations. And the one that initially caught my eye was that they are exempt from the $50,000 trust fund requirement.
Or endowment.
At the time, I was concerned about how in the world to raise $50,000, and we've since raised $300,000 and more. I presume, I don't know this, but I presume many states have some version of a church cemetery exception in their revised codes that would make it easier to start a new cemetery. But that would have to be that would have to be initiated through and owned by a religious organization of some sort.
Yeah, I think it helps for people to know that this isn't the same in all states. In fact, there are some states that don't allow private cemeteries at all. But the general description you're going to find, at least that I've found in almost all states that I've been researching, is that there tend to be religious or ecclesiastical societies is one category that's allowed. Another is a nonprofit corporation or association. Those tend to be the two major groups that can own and operate cemeteries. As I say, in some states, funeral directors can own them, and some states they can't even be situated next to cemeteries. So every state is different, as you say, but I think the one theme throughout every state is that religious or ecclesiastical societies are a valid ownership entity for cemeteries. So what's happening, what I'm seeing is a lot of people telling me that they want to start cemeteries and that they've discovered this religious exemption. So they're going to come up with a religion so they can take advantage of it. And that's another issue that we might want to discuss.
Right. might be better to just convince a local religious leader.
Yes.
Change one heart, as it were.
Yeah. We just have a couple more minutes here. Is there anything anyone else would like to contribute to this part of the conversation, or anything that we've talked about before? We're such a quiet, reflective group. Go ahead.
I guess I wonder about the whole conservation burial. If, I think that there's the land trust that we are involved with. Sounds like that would, if a church owned a cemetery, would that still be considered a conservation burial situation?
Yes, absolutely. Heidi, would you like to speak to Carolina Memorial Sanctuary in South Carolina?
Sure, I had to unmute myself. So I think one of the first things I would just like to preface is that we find in our work as conservation professionals that there can be a real disconnect between people's understanding of what conservation organizations actually do and what land trusts do and the role that they play in communities. And frequently we find people have a lot of assumptions about how the land trust is there to support their work. Or their enthusiasm for protecting the land. And land trusts are very enthusiastic about protecting land and very devoted to that. And they have significant obligations to the work that they are committing to. So I think we always need to remember that in any sort of relationship, you want to make sure that you're entering into it as openly as possible, because they'll have their own story, you have your own story, and you're looking for a place where you can meet. And that's kind of in a funny way how an experience took place in the North Carolina mountains, where a Buddhist Sangha determined through a very passionate, beautiful individual that she wanted to make this her life's work. And she essentially sold all of her possessions in order to purchase a piece of land that was then held by the Buddhist Sangha, in order to create this burial ground. It's a lovely, small conservation burial ground on, I think it's 7 acres. And it sits kind of in a little bit of a foothills area, and it's surrounded by farmland and a very charming doggy camp on one side. And subsequent to their establishing themselves on this piece of property, they happened to also be neighbors to another church. And it was that church that helped them develop the concept and was the entity that was holding the conservation easement. Right in that picture, a church holding conservation easement for a Buddhist Sangha, that's a particular type of, I guess that's a particular example of how conservation burial can work. The Green Burial Council has recently been working to revise some of their standards. And so we're hoping that those standards are a little clearer for folks who are interested in doing conservation burial grounds. And we'll see that really the organization that holds conservation easement really has to be a conservation organization or a municipality, an agency in a municipality. And that since has happened for Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. The local land trust decided to become involved with Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, and over a period of time they developed their relationship to the extent that Conserving Carolina, that's the name of the land trust, was interested in holding the easement for Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. So hopefully that didn't make things even more confusing for people, but these things take time. And they take, I think, significant effort at patiently building relationships with one another to ensure that each entity is getting what it needs out of the relationship. So Carolina Memorial Sanctuary now is a full-fledged conservation burial site with a relationship with a conservation organization that helps to support them with the management of their lands. And they are able to do their work and promote themselves as a conservation burial organization because of that.
Thank you. That was perfectly done. I do want to say one of the big questions that I get frequently is from groups that are trying to put together a cemetery, whether it's a religious group or not. They want to know if they have to start certification process before they've even built their cemetery. And the answer is, build your cemetery according to the standards that the GBC puts out, hopefully, because they will help with directing a little bit, as well as ensuring integrity. But the land trust aspect, if you're going for a full conservation piece, most land trusts, I would assume, are looking for you to be pretty well organized before you are going to be able to sign on the dot. But I think developing the relationship with the local land trust as you're working along is critical. You think that's about sums it up, Heidi?
Ooh, my phone is frozen. That was perfectly said, Lee. Right now, we are working with a private landowner, and what we have really been encouraging them, and these folks are super excited. They have a lot of practical professional experience in the natural world. They're landscape professionals and artists. A lot of very well-intentioned effort is going into their project, and we have really been encouraging them to, as they're considering different sites for their conservation burial ground, to be in communication with the conservation organization. Sometimes it's possible that in developing an honest relationship with a member of a land trust, you can learn about target areas that the land trust is interested in protecting. And it's possible that in some of those targeted areas, there might be overlap with your project and with what their goals are in terms of protecting a particular piece of property that has conservation values, like it's a forested area or agricultural land, or it helps protect water quality. Or in the circumstances of this situation in Florida, it's a particular bird habitat that has elevated a section of this community in the eyes of the land trusts. So if you can develop that relationship with someone on the land trust staff to better understand what it is they're after, we believe there are conversations to be had, you know, over time, where it's possible that the two projects can meet. I will say one more thing is that we just did a presentation at the National Land Conservation Conference, and we had about 65 people in the room, and we actually polled a lot of these people before they came into the room, because we were really curious about where land conservation staff and board members, where they sat on this spectrum of enthusiasts or, you know, skeptics. And we were really surprised that a lot of conservation folks who were coming to this conference actually had familiarity with green burial, were being approached by members in their community about it, and were actually curious. And so that was a positive for us, because we're always hoping to continue to advocate for these projects. But we never want to take that place of assumption in thinking that it's right for every single land trust. It really isn't right for every single one. It's right for certain ones. And just as Lee said, if you can demonstrate your own commitment to the project in the sense of wanting to help fundraise, wanting to help organize and operationalize the cemetery, you become a much more interesting partner than if you are just walking in the door and saying, this is what should happen. And as I'm sure everyone realizes. But that's where we find this tension. And so I feel that it's worth sharing that with folks, is that land trusts, over the course of our experience and working with them, have either slammed the door shut or actually said, you know, we're getting more calls about that, and we'd be interested in learning more.
Great, thanks, Heidi. There we go. Our hour is up, everybody. I still feel like there's so much to explore around this topic, and some of the points, Rochelle, that you brought up right at the very beginning, I think are going to be food for thought at the conference in October when we have our panel. We'll be feeding them some important questions, and we might start with where you started. I hope everybody's happy with what they heard and connected to each other. Don't forget the Facebook page, the Green Burial Council Peer Forum, so that if there's someone here you didn't get a chance to chat with or you want to talk to, you can meet them there. There are a few things here that I'm going to follow up on. I'll let you know some pieces like Cody's paper and some info on where to find cemeteries in Florida and a few other things like that. I'll make sure we follow up, and we'll hopefully see you again at another forum. Anybody have any last words? I thought that was pretty appropriate for a death talk. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Well, thank you all for coming.